Hello everyone, this is Major Green, also known as Nitpicking Nerd, and today I want to review the trailers of both Star Trek Discovery Season 2 and the Orville Season 2, and I want to review both of them and to compare them. And what I found funny is that narration in the beginning, and the Orville narration sounds almost like a parody of the Discovery narration. It's kind of very similar but opposite, and there's no way it was deliberate, because it sounded like part of the dialogue in an actual episode of the Orville, and I doubt they could have known this narration from the Discovery unless they have spies in that production. They could not have known, and yet they were still able to pull off almost like a parody of that narration, in which Michael says, "We have always looked to the stars to discover who we are." And in the Orville footage, there's a line by Captain Ed Mercer, "In the vastness of the universe, we found cultural diversity, and we become a way for the universe to know itself," something like that. So it sounds almost like a parody of that narration by Michael. So it's almost as if he predicted the narration that will be in the real Star Trek and made a joke out of it before it even exists. I also find it interesting how the Discovery trailer has a lot more humor in it, so it almost feels as if Discovery is trying to imitate the Orville, especially at that scene in the end in which they show a strange alien in the elevator, which reminds me of an Orville episode in which they kept meeting a strange alien with a big head inside the elevator all the time. And so it's almost as if Discovery is now trying to imitate the style of the Orville, trying to be more funny. Apparently the whole war plot is over, and they are now going to the direction of exploration, a mystery, a science fiction story, and more comedy in the meanwhile and stuff like that, which is a good thing. However, I hope they don't completely forget about the Klingon story, because I wasn't satisfied at all with how they wrapped up that story. It was kind of ridiculous. We almost didn't actually see the war. We didn't see any planetary battles, we didn't see big fleet battles, we didn't see almost nothing. We saw like a few skirmishes and that's it. So that was the whole Klingon war, that's it. So that's kind of disappointing. And that whole setup with Tyler being a Klingon and now human and all that stuff, so all of that was just for nothing. I mean, if they're not actually going to do anything with that, so it was all pointless. And so I don't like the fact that they're kind of abandoning everything they set up in the first season when it wasn't fully exploited. That potential wasn't really exploited well. But maybe they'll get back to some of those plot elements later, so maybe they'll do something interesting with that later. So it seems as if they listen to the fans. I mean, they're now doing a more science fiction story of exploration and some kind of mystery, and they're now trying to be more comedic. So I do admit the trailer does look better than season 1 of Discovery. It looks much better, even the visual style. It doesn't look as annoying as it looked like in the first season. And comparing that to the Orville, I always said I like the style of the Orville better. Everything looks beautiful, everything looks clear, there's no lens flares, so I do prefer the visual style of the Orville. However, to be honest, the Orville does look kind of cheaper. I mean, in the Discovery, everything looks much more detailed. Everything, all the designs of the ships and even of the aliens, it looks much more detailed, and so it does look kind of more realistic. And when you look at the Orville, everything looks much cheaper, including the costumes of the aliens and even some of the sets. If you look closely, they do look much cheaper. However, I prefer the design of it. I prefer the brightness. I prefer the beautiful look of it, of the ship and stuff like that. And in the Discovery, everything looks kind of ugly, but more detailed, and so it's a mixed bag. So I don't want to be completely one-sided. I do want to give credit where credit is due, and so I do admit that the Discovery designs do look more detailed and more realistic. However, I wish they wouldn't do too much shaky cam, and they wouldn't do too much lens flares and that blurry stuff in space. I don't think it looks good. I think in season 1 they went too far with that. I mean, it ruined a lot of scenes just by having too much flashes and lens flares and kind of blurry lights and stuff like that. A little bit too much of that was in the season 1. Meanwhile, in the Orville, everything looks much clearer and brighter and better, but kind of cheaper also. So that's it for the visual stuff. Now, about Captain Pike, they are now adding Captain Pike to the cast apparently. I don't know if it's just for one episode or what. It would be kind of strange if he's not the captain of the Enterprise, if he suddenly becomes the captain of Discovery for a long time. That would be kind of ridiculous. I mean, who is captaining the Enterprise during all of this? I mean, Spock is also apparently missing, so who's the captain? So I hope it won't be for the whole season. I hope it's only just for a few episodes. And as for his character, I have mixed feelings on that. He does visually look similar enough to the original Pike. Also, his uniform is more similar to that of the original Pike. And maybe we'll get an explanation for why his uniform is different. Maybe they'll gradually start to become more similar to the original series uniforms. That would be nice. And I'm curious if they will show the Enterprise from the inside, because apparently Pike just beams over, so maybe they won't even show the insides of the Enterprise, which is kind of an easy way out of that problem of how you actually would show that. I mean, the outside is updated, but what will the inside look like? I think we see a shot of, I guess that's Spock's quarters maybe, so maybe we will see a little bit of that. And by the way, that whole Spock thing being related to Michael, that's kind of ridiculous in my opinion. And I don't really want to see a new Spock, I have no interest in that, and look at what they did to Sarek, how they ruined the character of Sarek. I'm really terrified they will do something like that with Spock, will make him ridiculous. So Pike apparently takes over the Discovery because he wants to study some kind of signals in space which are very far apart. So I guess he needs the Discovery because it has a spore drive, Sperm drive will give you STD. So I guess that's the reason why he needs the Discovery, so I have no problem with that as a plot point. But he does seem a little bit off, he looks a little bit too comedic. The original Pike didn't really make jokes, he was kind of straight-faced, he's kind of even depressed. I think there was, in the beginning of the original series, he was kind of depressed and stuff, so it doesn't seem fit with his personality in this version. Why is he cracking jokes and all that stuff? Is it them trying to be like the Orville, I guess? So now, a while ago, I myself actually said if Pike appears, maybe he should be cracking jokes and stuff, and I said that because there is actually a line by the original Pike in the original episode in which he said something about he's not used to having women on the bridge, something like that, and that made him sound very sexist. And I said that one way to solve that little problem is to say that maybe he was just joking, so maybe have him tell all kinds of inappropriate jokes all the time, and that way it will retroactively fix that little problem with his character in the original series. So I cannot really complain about something which I myself suggested should be done. When I said Pike should be telling jokes like that, maybe inappropriate jokes, and this way it will kind of fix that problem in the original series, because it is kind of ridiculous. We cannot really justify that in the original series. That's supposed to be in the future, and he's complaining about his first officer being a woman and stuff like that. So there's really no way to justify that line, except if we say that it was just a joke. So maybe his character is one who tells all kinds of jokes. So if that's what they will do, if he'll be telling all kinds of inappropriate, sexist jokes all the time, then that will kind of fix that problem in the original. So I wouldn't actually mind that. I do hope they will try to make him as similar to the original as possible, and not just have him be something totally different. Otherwise I would say, well, why didn't you just create a new character? Why did you take a character we know if you plan to change him? So that's my fear, and that's what they did with Sarek, which I didn't like, and also they kind of ruined the Mud in the first season. They made him kind of a psychopath killer when he was just kind of a lovable, funny criminal in the original. He wasn't a murderer in the original. So I don't like it that they changed these characters. I mean, if you want to change it so much, then do a whole new character. Why are you bringing back an existing character just to change it? As for the plot they're showing us, it does seem more interesting. It seems like a more Star Trek story. They kind of hint at all kinds of fantasy elements, which I don't really want. I want it to be as hardcore science fiction as possible. I don't like all these hints about all kinds of fantastical elements too much. I don't want that. Now, as for the comedy bits, I always said the comedy is a good thing. I love comedy in science fiction. However, this show was trying very hard to be more realistic show, more adult show. In season 1, they really were trying to be serious, and so I hope they don't completely abandon that idea, because again, that will make season 1 pointless. I mean, why work so hard to make it all feel realistic if you're just going to change it later? And so I hope they kind of stick to a more realistic tone, simply because that's what makes this series unique. And so if they bring in too many ridiculous stuff just for comedy, that might kind of ruin the realism. But so far I don't have any complaints. That bit with the alien in the turbo lift, it's hard to judge without seeing the full scene, but so far it's fine. I don't have a problem with that. The bit in which he sneezes on someone, that might be pushing that a little bit too much into comedy. It feels a little bit forced and artificial, but it might be good in the end, so I don't know yet. As for the Orville, we have a shot of an exotic alien in the Orville, which is kind of funny, that elephant creature. And that's the good thing about the Orville. The Orville is a comedy from the start, so they don't have to worry about being realistic. They can do the most ridiculous stuff they want and no one will complain. Because they're a comedy show, so they can and they should do as much ridiculous stuff as possible. That's all fine in the Orville. However, I don't want that kind of stuff in Discovery. I want Discovery to be as serious as possible because that's how they set up that show. So they should continue with what they did. The Orville exists already, so it's too late for you to become like the Orville. So you should stick with what you started with, which is the more serious tone. And I'm sure it has a lot of fans who prefer that kind of tone. And I also think it shouldn't be mixed too much. A little bit of comedy is good, but don't completely change the tone of the show. Keep that darker tone. That's what will make that show more special and more interesting in its own way. And so I don't want them to change too much. I know it kind of sounds like I'm contradicting myself. I was the one who was complaining about that style, and so now I'm telling them to keep that style, but it's kind of too late. You started that whole show like that. I say don't do a U-turn, don't completely change the show to something else entirely, and only add humor where it's appropriate. Don't try to force it, because then it simply won't work. It won't fit that universe you created, which is darker and more dystopian kind of future. So don't ruin that setup by forcing in a comedy when it doesn't work. And so that's my concern for Discovery, that they will now try to appease the fans too much, which is also a danger. I mean, too much fan service is dangerous. Just like, bringing back all the original series characters, I don't think it's a good idea. It's very risky, so if you don't do it right, you will only screw yourself up even more. So that's what I think about the Discovery trailer. I will give the second season a chance because I do think the show has potential. I didn't completely hate season 1. It had a lot of stupid things, and I dislike the fact that they are completely kind of rebooting the Star Trek universe, but there were some things that I did like in that show. It did have some interesting twists and ideas, and so I don't hate that show. And if it wasn't Star Trek, if it was a whole other name, then I would have far fewer complaints about that show than I did because it's Star Trek. Because it calls itself Star Trek, then I had a lot of complaints that it doesn't really fit. The tone and the story and a lot of things in the canon didn't fit with the other shows. And that caused a lot of anger by fans of the older Star Trek shows toward this show. If it was called something else and didn't rely on the Star Trek ties at all, then less people would have a problem with it. Less people would be watching that also, but less people would have the problem. As for the Orville, it fits much more with the tone and style of the other Star Trek shows. And the Orville could have been like set in the future of the Star Trek universe, and it will tie in perfectly. So that shows how much close it is to the older Star Trek shows, which we all love. And so that's why a lot of people say the Orville is like the true successor of Star Trek. It's set in the farther away future in the 25th century. It has that beautiful style of Star Trek. It has the humor, even though it's a more comedy show. It's like a parody. But it fits Star Trek a lot. Now, the Orville does feel a little bit cheap at places, and also it did kind of rip off a lot of plots from the older Star Trek shows, but they did it so well that I don't really complain about that. I'm fine with them. And by the way, another thing that was funny in the trailer of the Orville is that he basically admitted that he's plagiarizing other stuff. There's a line by him saying, I plagiarized this from 7 different places, so it's nice of him to admit it. It's nice of him to admit that he's stealing stuff, so I found that very funny also. In a few places it does feel a little bit too much of a ripoff. I mean, some things are too similar. I wish they would do their own thing more. For example, the character of Bortus, they show him being exactly like Worf. Like in this new footage, we see them talking about his upcoming birthday, and he says he doesn't want a joint party, stuff like that. It really reminds me of that episode about Worf having a birthday and stuff like that. So the Orville sometimes does feel a little bit too much of an imitation. I wish they would do their own thing more. I wish they would be kind of more creative with their own ideas and not so much relying on just imitating the older Star Trek shows. So that's my concern for the Orville. It did have a lot of their own new ideas in season 1, so I hope that continues in season 2, and that they don't just rely on ripped off ideas too much. And as I said, the visual style of the Orville is much better in my opinion. Everything is bright, everything is clear, the uniforms are great, everything looks very good. And the special effects look good, but they do seem to kind of lack details sometimes, so I wish this show would have the budget of Star Trek Discovery. Maybe this way it would look much richer and better and more detailed, but still with a beautiful tone, so that would have been the best option. But I still prefer this over the rich looking visuals in Discovery, which are kind of a jumbled mess that you can't tell what's going on because it's also jumbled. And so I personally prefer the Orville style more. even though I do acknowledge it's kind of less detailed and less rich. For example, you see this elephant alien, you can kind of tell it's just a mask. You can kind of tell it doesn't look like an actual creature. However, that new alien we see in Discovery looks much more detailed. It even blinks. You can see it blinking. So it does look better. I admit that alien in Discovery looks better than this elephant alien in Orville, for example. But the Orville one is funnier. So the Orville is comedy, so they can allow themselves the freedom to do more ridiculous aliens, which is a good thing. They don't have to be afraid of looking too ridiculous. Being ridiculous is fine in this kind of setting. Now we have a lot of glimpses of season 2 of the Orville, and it looks like again they'll be fighting the Krill and making first contact with new aliens and stuff like that. So far I don't really see anything very original. I hope there will be a lot of original stories. In one bit apparently we see the Orville maybe going again to that two-dimensional space. I might be mistaken, but it looks like the same kind of special effect that we saw in season 1 when they went into two-dimensional space. So it will be interesting if they actually revisit that same dimension again, because that was kind of fascinating. But most of all, I hope that they will have new original stories, and as I said many times before, that's the most important thing, the story. The show that will have the more original new science fiction stories, interesting stories, will be the better show despite the visuals. So I don't care that much about the visuals as I do about the story. So that's the most important thing in the end of the day. Whoever will have the more interesting new original stories will be better in my opinion. So I hope both shows do well. I'm looking forward to seeing both of them, and that's it for now. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.